Hello, educators of Virginia. My name is Chris Jones, and I'm proud to serve as the Executive Director for VASCD. I also get the privilege of hosting our podcast content. And today I am extremely excited to welcome Naomi Church. And we are here to talk about universal design for learning and the implications for math instruction, not just at the tier one level, but also how we support students and work to close some learning gaps. So Naomi, welcome. First of all, thank you so much for carving out the time to be with us and allowing us to record this podcast episode. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have the opportunity to talk about things that I'm super passionate about. These are things where, once you get me started, I tend to not shut up. And so you're giving me the platform to talk about these, amazing things that make a difference for students. Yeah, I'm good. Things have been really busy. I have two middle school children,
Okay.
so that just makes life incredibly, busy and all over the place right now, but in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate that, and you are definitely exuding how you're showing up in this space, just like the positive vibe, the positive energy. So I believe your authenticity when you say things are good. So I appreciate that. I too am well. Things are going very well. We are very busy, very busy in terms of what we're doing with VASCD. And then as a dad, I feel like I'm always busy. We've got four. One's in middle school. We got two in high school, one in middle, and one still in elementary. But I feel like my role as a dad now is more of an Uber driver than anything else. We are literally everywhere all the time. Sometimes my wife, Suzanne, and I get to take the kids together, and sometimes we have to divide and conquer. So I appreciate the busyness.
I I feel that in my soul, it being like a driver so much.
Yes.
They just make plans, and I'm like, you don't have a car. Like, how did you think that was going to happen?
Yes, yes. Oh, that's great. All right. Anyway, so Naomi, let's dig into it. So let's really unpack UDL, Universal Design for Learning. What is it? What does it mean? What does it look like for those of us who are not as familiar with UDL as maybe we should be? It's always great to have an explanation of kind of the basic understanding of what it is.
For sure. So, universal design for learning is a scientifically valid framework for how humans learn. And it is really neat. A common misconception is that it is a checklist, and you can sort of just get this checklist when you're making a lesson or something and check off these items and be like, I UDL'd it, I'm done. And that's really not the way it works. It is a framework, and the ultimate goal is to create expert learners. And so it sort of takes the teacher on this journey of also becoming an expert learner, right? When I'm helping students to become expert learners, I myself am always learning in the process. And it even works this way as somebody who presents on this at conferences and talks about it. Every time I do a presentation, I tweak it and make it a little bit better based on how things went before. And so it is really broken into these three categories of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And so it can seem like a lot when teachers just look at the framework, but I like to point out that it's broken into these three areas, and you can really just attack one area at a time. It is not something that has to be all or nothing. It is not like you have to fully jump in. There are little practical applications that are easy to implement that we can start with anytime, any day. But really, the idea behind it is it got its start from universal design in architecture, which was about making physical spaces accessible for persons with disabilities. So, if we think about ramps to get into buildings and curb cuts, it makes the space accessible for people in wheelchairs, right? And what they found, of course, that it ends up being useful for everybody, for people traveling who have luggage, for parents pushing strollers, for teachers with their wheelie carts full of journals to grade, right? All of these different applications. And so something that was originally intended to support persons with disabilities just ends up being useful for everybody. And that is absolutely the idea, is that this framework for learning, it can absolutely support students with disabilities and help make the learning more inclusive, accessible, equitable for them. But it just ends up being useful for everybody because we don't have to wait until a student is diagnosed with a disability to help them and offer supports.
Yeah, yeah. So there were two things that you said that really made me think, and the first one I want to unpack a little bit. So I really like that phrase, expert learner. What does that mean? What does it mean, and really, what does it look like to be an expert learner?
So, in the actual UDL framework, it says at the very bottom that the ultimate goal is to create expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, and that is specifically tied to engagement, right? If we really dig into engagement, we can create these learners, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about kids or adults who are purposeful in what they do and highly motivated, right? That's the number one complaint that I get from teachers is like, they're not into it. They don't want to do it. I can't make them do it, right? So expert learners are purposeful and motivated. Then when it comes to this area of representation, sort of showing things in different ways, we create expert learners who are resourceful and knowledgeable, right? So they know where to go to get the help that they need. They can self advocate. And then finally, in this space of action and expression, we create expert learners who are strategic and goal directed, right? So I can plan for myself. I can use my strengths to show what I can do as opposed to what I can't do. So then it's this space of creating expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal directed.
Okay. So with those things, because I think anyone listening right now would be like, yes, I want my kids to that's how I want my students right there, what you just said. And so if I understand this correctly, then in order to get that, there's some specific things that I can do intentionally in my design that are universally good for all kids that tie back to what we know about how the brain learns, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
okay, so then if those are, you just described the students that, yes, that's the student I want right there. How do I get that student? So what are, to help us out, really to help me out, what are some things that we know to be true about how the brain learns to help us better understand that design?
So interestingly, when they first came out with the framework for UDL, they had representation first, then action and expression, and they had engagement last. And what they found was that the other components really are less effective, less meaningful. That's kind of a strong way to say it, but it's true, without engagement. So in the second version of the guidelines, they redid it so engagement is first. And so, actually, if you look at the framework, the checkpoints are numbered and it looks like they're numbered out of order because when they moved engagement, now we're starting sort of out of order. And that is the number one thing, is we have to start with engagement. We have to start with creating these learners who are purposeful and motivated, or the rest of it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all awesome. Awesome. Very interesting. So, so UDL is commonly associated with English language arts, right? Typically, we think about UDL more through that lens, but you like to think about UDL through the lens of math. So, what help me make some connections between universally designing learning, universally designing instruction to really universally encompass all the kids in the math setting. What does that mean to you?
So I speak about UDL at conferences, and I started speaking at conferences where there's a lot of math teachers, because what I was getting was like, yeah, that sounds good, but I teach math. Okay, well, those two things are not mutually exclusive. We can absolutely universally design math instruction, and this is going to be a key component in amping up tier 1 math instruction, because we are in this space now where there's a lot of research and background with reading. And then when it comes to math, certainly the research is a lot newer, and we still have a lot of teachers teaching math the way they were taught 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And what we're finding, of course, is that that is not super effective. And it's comfortable as the teacher to teach the way that I learned. But if we look at the research around math and how people learn in general, what we're finding is that there needs to be key changes. And part of it is just in positioning math. When we talk about engagement with creating learners who are purposeful and motivated, you're not motivated if you don't think of yourself as a math person. If you're in this space of, oh, I'm not a math person, like if you think about if you've ever gone out to dinner and you're with a bunch of people and the check comes, right? And so as a teacher, I would get all of the time, oh, you're a math teacher. Here, you split up the check. I'm not a math person. Oh, I'm terrible at that. I can't split up the check. And we see these things in front of kids too. Parents are always saying it in front of kids. And the thing is, you would never sit down at a restaurant, open up the menu and be like, oh, I'm not literate. I'm just not a reading person. Here, you read the menu for me. Like, that's not socially acceptable, but it has become socially acceptable for people to just like throw away math, essentially. And there's even research to show that when females say things like this in front of their female students or their daughters, their math achievement goes down. Girls really internalize this idea that like it's okay to not be a math person. My mom, my teacher said they weren't either. Oh, I just don't have it. And first of all, there is research to show that like boys are not inherently better at math. There's no like female math deficit. Um, but yeah, girls will really internalize this. And so like a key piece of authentic engagement, not like bells and whistles, I'm standing on chairs and singing and kind of stuff, but this like deep rooted engagement is starting with the belief that everybody is a mathematician, that everybody can do math, and not spreading these ideas that there's such a thing as a math person. And so we really start there. And that's what I'm talking about with there's these practical everyday applications to UDL, and it's creating. So one of the checkpoints in engagement is about creating relevance, value, and authenticity, right? Math feels more relevant and valuable if I see myself as a doer of math, if I'm able to make connections to all the places that I see it in the real world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, you know, that is what you just said, that last part. If we can unpack that a little bit. I think because I was before I got into administration and school leadership and now as executive director for a nonprofit, I, I was a math teacher. And so I felt the difference in engagement when it was math for math's sake versus let's unpack the math of this real world thing or this highly contextualized thing that we brought to the table. So what do you see as can I want to live in that space, but I also want to really hit at the same time maybe or maybe they need to be separated, but this idea of bringing that context for that relevance to the math classroom specifically, while also um, going after the learning gaps that we have, learning gaps that have always been there that were exacerbated by the pandemic. And now I've got a classroom of 30 kids. They're all over the place with where I need them to be in terms of their readiness level. I need to bring that relevance with the context. And I, oh, by the way, I'm accountable for getting them to where they should be in relation to the intended outcomes of my class. What
That's a
what do
lot
you
of
think?
things.
What do you think?
All right. So there is an amazing math author, speaker, consultant, Robert Kaplinski, and he does a great job on his blog talking about how to make math so that it is exciting and relevant for students, even up into the high school level where we're getting into some really rigorous mathematics. Uh, using videos as teasers, like putting up a video and bleeping out the part about the numbers so that students, you're creating this knowledge gap where students are hungry for it. They want to know what's coming next and what's missing. And so they will engage with the math to figure it out. So he's definitely somebody to get on his email list, check out his stuff, because he provides a lot of that. Like, here's the video clip, or here's the premise of a lesson about, or here's this crazy thing I saw in the news about somebody eating, 26,000 donuts, and now what do we do about it? And so he has some really cool stuff, and that's what makes the math exciting, right? That is a key piece of the engagement. I see where it's happening in everyday life, and I want to use the math to solve a problem, to find out more. So like that really helps, with engagement, universal design for learning, with this highly effective tier 1 instruction. But like you said, there are a lot of students who are struggling now. We had a lot of students who were struggling before there was a gap in instruction and we moved it to online. And so certainly that's been exacerbated. And so what we're seeing is a lot of students coming up in RTI, MTSS, where it's like the student is years behind in math. What do we do about it? And one of the things that I'm seeing is that, we step into this MTSS meeting. I used to be an RTI coordinator myself, and teachers could come in for reading and clearly identify the area of need. Oh, it really seems like he's struggling with phonemic awareness. Oh, this is a decoding issue. This is a vocabulary issue, a comprehension issue. And then math was always sort of the afterthought. And these people would come in and I'd be like, all right, so, what is he struggling with? And it would be like math. And math. And like, that is not at all helpful. Like, we can't address all of math.
Right.
And so the thing is that while in high quality tier 1 instruction, we're sort of attacking things from all different angles, when it comes to intervention and remediation, it really has to be focused. And so one of the key pieces that I think is missing when it comes to closing learning gaps in math is identifying the priority educational need. So my friends in special education are very familiar with this term because we have to establish that to come up with an IEP. But the same thing needs to happen if we're going to provide any intervention, whether a student has a disability or not, is what is the priority here and where do I start? And so um really the pathway that I feel like is missing here is this general levels of math skill development. So we start with number sense. Number sense is to math what phonics is to reading. So that is to say, it is the foundational piece. It is these underlying skills that are mostly established in like the kindergarten and first grade standards. And we get to these kids in fourth and fifth grade who are struggling, and chances are they didn't master all of those first grade standards,
Yeah.
right? So number sense, and then computation, which is operations, add, subtract, multiply, divide, and then problem solving. So problem solving is last, and that's where most people want to start. Oh, he can't solve these multi-step word problems. All right, well, if he doesn't understand where, 6 is on a timeline relative to 16, then surely this is going to be a problem. And if he doesn't know what like 3 times 4 is, then yep, that problem solving will also be a problem. And so it is usually not where we need to start. If they're struggling with anything else, they're going to struggle with problem solving. And so we can throw all of our resources at problem solving and it's still not going to fix it.
Mm.
So we really have to look at, is the student deficient in number sense? If so, I'm going to start there. If they're not, then I'm going to look at computation. Is that an area I need to address? And usually it's sitting in one of those two spots.
Yeah. So walk me through like that example that you just gave that we were really working through a classroom full of students. They're all over the place. I've got some dedication to the tier one process. And then when it comes time to really get at it, I maybe have a couple of students who are in the I need some number sense. I got a couple of students who might be in the computational, and maybe some students are actually ready for the problem solving that we're doing, and maybe some students have already mastered whatever level of problem solving. I'm like, what the heck does my classroom look like in terms of my ability to manage that beyond the tier one setting?
Oh, that's a good question. And honestly, there is no easy answer for that. I mean, that's what everybody wants is like the catch-all, and it depends on scheduling and class size and the amount of students at each level that I have. But a common misconception is that reteaching and remediation are the same thing,
Mm.
and they are not. Reteaching happens as a part of tier one instruction. That is, I taught the standard, and if my students didn't master that grade level standard, then I need to teach it again. If I'm universally designing, maybe I'm going to show it in different ways. Maybe there's a rock and learn video that I can use, or there's a study jam song with lyrics that explain what's happening, and I can reteach it using these different resources to really reach kids. Right. And that is not the same thing as a student who has a foundational skill deficit, because that is somebody that needs to be remediated. So chances are teachers are going to have way more kids who need to be retaught than need to be remediated. And so there really has to be space for both of these things in a good math block. And so we get that from taking away some of the whole group instruction time. For example, if we have a math block that is an hour long, I'm actually going out to work with a school tomorrow to establish the math block based on their schedule. And what it's going to look like for them is that the first 20 minutes is where we're doing the whole group instruction with productive struggle. We're introducing things. And then in the second 20 minutes is where the teacher has an opportunity to pull the kids who looked like they struggled during that whole group. They really didn't get it. And she's going to reteach the same thing, but in a different way, maybe while the others are at centers or something. And then that last 20 minutes is where I can remediate. And it may be the same kids who needed to be retaught, or it may not be, right? The reteaching is very flexible. It depends on whatever the lesson was for the day. And sometimes kids are going to get things and sometimes they're not. The remediation group doesn't change easily. These are the kids who we've identified with maybe diagnostic assessments or screeners that they are pretty deficient. And now I'm using a program or a research-based intervention, and I need to pull these kids regularly. And so it is hard to fit it all in. Like it could be that during that remediation time, a couple days a week, I'm doing my number sense group, and a couple days a week, I'm doing my computation group, right? It
Mhm.
is unlikely that a teacher will have the time to meet with a group 5 days a week, but I can work it out in the scheduling to find a way, hopefully, based on how many kids are sort of in each spot.
It sounds a lot like small group instruction.
Yeah, I mean, that is what it all comes down to. It's
Yeah.
just what's happening in the small group and how flexible that is. And the thing is that in whole group, we tend to be like, oh, they're not getting it. And so then we extend whole group. And now instead of 20 minutes, we've made it an hour where we just said it slower and louder. And like the kids still didn't get it. And what I keep trying to say is if they didn't get it in that 20 minutes, that is a good reason to stop your whole group,
Yeah.
because you continuing whole group is not going to make them get it. It's time to do something different.
Or we overestimate that the kids did get it, where we might ask and maybe the same 3 to 5 kids are responding and we're like, all right, they got it, we're good to go, let's move on to the next thing, when in fact it was 3 to 5 that got it, not 23 who got it, the 23 who remained silent. I appreciate that. So last question that I have for you is really going back to, we mixed it in with the relevance question and the question about context. So with universal design for learning, I didn't hear you say we need to start with tier two. Right? Did I hear you say that? So
No.
so if we're going to close these gaps, why wouldn't I start with tier two? Why is tier one still important in terms of getting the kids what they need to reach the intended learning outcomes?
Ooh, such a good question. The bottom line is that you can't intervene your way out of poor core instruction. I
Mm,
heard that a while ago and it totally resonated with me. It when we have students who are struggling, it needs to be a two-pronged approach. We have to have high quality tier one instruction where we're universally designing so everybody can access the curriculum, where everybody is engaged and they see how it's relevant to them, where we're creating expert learners, where we're addressing number sense, computation, problem solving, all at the same time, because they all really go together. And so we have to have that going on. And at the same time, pull these kids who are struggling the most and fill in the learning gaps. Because the thing is, if we stop the high rigor standards based instruction to fill the gaps, the students just get further and further behind,
mm.
right? We are handicapping the kids because we're not exposing them to the standards, to the things that they need to be proficient with now. So it's this balance of fitting the two things in together so that we don't, with the best of intentions, get our kids further behind.
Yeah. Wow. That was it right there. That's a great way to end for me to get out of the way. Oh, what a great conversation, Naomi. I definitely appreciate it, and I wanted to give you a chance. You might have sparked an idea, or somebody has a further question. Is there a way that our audience can connect with you? What's the best way for somebody to connect with you?
Certainly. So I have a small business called Growing Minds Consulting. So my website is just growingmindsconsulting.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Growing Minds K12. And then my email address is on my website, my Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Basically, if you get to my website, you'll be able to get in touch with me anyway. And I have a blog on there that has a lot of math resources. So stuff you can just pull and go with that's totally free.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naomi. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. Definitely a learning moment for me, and I absolutely enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.